Just as I start, I would like to thank all of you for staying this long. Of all the world's numerous religions, none has so heavily influenced the arts as Christianity. And of all the types of Christianity that have existed, none has been as powerful or as divisive as the Roman Catholic Church. There have been numerous writers who have dismissed the importance of organized religion, including writers like Sigmund Freud and Martin de Sade, to name but two. While de Sade dismissed the need for religious chimeras at all, Freud acknowledged that people do need religion for support and stability in their lives. Canadian author Rikki Ducornet follows de Sade's example in dismissing the usefulness of the institution of the church within her novel The Stain. Unlike de Sade, however, she replaces it with a more natural, practical, useful religion based on lessons learned from nature. The image of the Catholic Church in Ducornet's novel is that of a rampantly corrupt institution that is totally out of touch with the lives and needs of its parishioners, while at the same time attempting to exact total control over the population through fear, misinformation, and intimidation. The image of God the Father is notable only by his complete absence from within the walls of the church. The God of nature, by contrast, rules not by fear and intimidation, but through subtle signs and practical, life-affirming information. In The Stain, God is not absent entirely. Rather, he dwells within the details of nature, not the church. A student of the writings of the Marquis de Sade, whom she actually cast as a major character in her novel The Fanmaker's Inquisition, Ducornet has certainly been influenced by his opinion on religion and religious institutions. De Sade's writings are filled with characters who, while appear to be pious in public, actually participate in countless sexual and immoral acts in private. In addition, de Sade uses his writings as a means of expounding his atheistic views of society, the world, and the universe in general. De Sade writes, quote, "Above all, beware of religion. Nothing is more apt to lure you astray than religion's baneful institutions," unquote. For de Sade, God is simply not needed, since nature and natural law are independent from religious dogma. He writes, quote, "God nor religion runs the universe. Since the universe runs itself, and the internal laws inherent in nature suffice, without any first cause or prime mover, to produce all it is and all that we know. The perpetual movement of matter explains everything. Why need we supply a motor to that which is ever in motion?" Unquote. Like de Sade, Ducornet also holds a physical role as being of the highest importance, and she said, quote, "I love the sensual world, I love the body, I love the physical, natural world," end quote. She also went on to explain that The Stain is, quote, "about the Christian idea of sin, the world and the body as seen as satanic vessels," unquote. This is a facet of Catholic dogma which goes directly against Ducornet's point of view. However, the idea of the body as a sinful thing, a thing to be tamed and controlled, however, is a fundamental aspect of Catholic dogma. In the Catholic tradition, you grow up being taught the flesh is bad. The world, the flesh, and the devil, those are your enemies. This concept of flesh and evil is personified by the character of Edma, who constantly represents not only her own body, but also the bodies and the physical needs of everyone around her. Edma frequently links physical pain and suffering to religious devotion and expression. This is first seen when she forces her husband Emile and her grandniece Charlotte into daily prayer, quote, "upon their knees, upon the unforgiving linoleum of the kitchen floor, a daily torture for Emile, a seasonal sufferer of gout," end quote. Edna does not stint on her own pain either, as shown in the scene when she takes Charlotte to church to pray. After settling Charlotte in a church, Edna drops to her knees and begins to crawl around the entire length and breadth of the church in, quote, "a harrowing ritual that lasted well over 2 hours and left her panting for breath and her knees badly bruised," end quote. For her pilgrimage to Lourdes, Edna goes even further, crawling around the entire religious compound, being, quote, "satisfied only when her knees began to bleed. She knew from her pain that she, at least, was worthy of salvation. 'I'm bleeding for you, Lord,' she kneeled." Each day, Edna traced the same itinerary until the flesh of her knees was mashed to jelly, end quote. In fact, by the time she's finished, she needs to actually buy a cane from the souvenir shop to get home, which she did not need when she went there in the first place. During her 14-hour train ride to Lourdes, Edna is also, quote, "unable to eat in public before strangers, as if mastication was as much a sin as fornication," end quote. Indeed, any type of bodily function of any kind is repugnant to Edma. She even poisons the domestic animals of her neighbors, which she, quote, despised for fornicating and defecating in public in the street without shame, end quote. Edmund's continual physical and verbal abuse of Charlotte, which is seen throughout the entire novel, is only suspended once, and it's when Charlotte completely represses her own physical desires by refusing food. This actually also results in Charlotte frequently vomiting. Edna praises the child's illness by lack of appetite by exclaiming, quote, imagine, the angel lives on water and air, a little nun, end quote. This is actually the only time in the entire novel when Edna praises Charlotte for anything. Edna's extreme repression of the flesh could easily be dismissed as the religious fanaticism of a single character. However, her views on the connection between physical torture and divine grace are mirrored by the character of the Mother Superior from St. James School, who sets out to meet Charlotte because of the child's, quote, devastating act of violence upon her mortal husk, end quote, catches the nun's attention. The Mother Superior, quote, believed that it was only the punished bodies which received visits from God, and so is so convinced that this child, dramatically marked from birth, who had eaten glass, was a rare clay body destined for the purification in the fiery kiln of beatitude, end quote. Mother Superior is absolutely thrilled by Charlotte's act of self-mutilation. She's convinced that it's the act of a future martyr, and encourages Charlotte to emulate the physical suffering of other contemporary martyrs, who speak the physical torture and self-denial are continually recounted to the child as examples of perfect piety. Indeed, Charlotte is told that if she is not judged to be worthy to shine with these modern martyrs by God, then Charlotte will be excluded forever from heaven and God's divine grace. Mother Superior is thrilled to have found Charlotte and feels certain that attending St. James School will cause this child's spirit to, quote, shine forth, illuminating God's glory, the glory of St. James, and above all, the glory of the Mother Superior. Hallelujah, she sang within herself after these visits. What a prize, end quote. The repetition of the phrase, what a prize, is key here. It creates the impression that the Mother Superior sees Charlotte more like a prize calf at the county fair rather than a young soul in need of spiritual guidance. In fact, Charlotte's spiritual needs and questions are completely ignored by both the Mother Superior and her Aunt Edma, both of whom are intent on using Charlotte for their own ends and whose treatment of the child is hardly virtuous. Indeed, De Sade points out that, quote, the virtuous sentiment is a low-based impulse that stinks of commerce. I give unto you in order that I may obtain from you in exchange, end quote. Edna's only real concern is to keep the child from embarrassing her in front of her neighbors, while the Mother Superior wants to turn Charlotte into a holy martyr in order to elevate the nun's own standing within the church. Neither of them have any concern for Charlotte herself, and she's just an instrument of their desires, a means to an end, rather than a young soul in need of guidance. So clearly, if Charlotte wants any kind of spiritual salvation, she's got to look beyond the walls of the Catholic Church. Even Sigmund Freud, an avowed atheist like De Sade, referred to religion as, quote, the universal neurosis of humanity, unquote. But he also acknowledged that, quote, religious ideas have exercised the very strongest influence upon mankind, end quote. However, while De Sade encourages the complete rejection of religion as useless, Freud admits that, quote, countless people find their one consolation in the doctrines of religion, and only with their help can they endure life, end quote. De Sade must have clearly been aware of how many people actually do rely on God, at least some kind of image of God, in order to get through life, since despite her criticism of the Catholic Church, the image of God himself is not entirely absent from the novel The Stain. Flouting reader expectations, the story takes great pains to include images of a God who does not dwell within the walls of the church, but instead can be found in the natural physical world. God may not be in his stone house, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't exist entirely. According to Sigmund Freud, the purpose of any religion or culturally based moral system is threefold. Quote, they must exercise the terrors of nature, they must reconcile one to the cruelty of fate, particularly as shown in death, and they must make amends for the suffering and predations that the communal life of culture has imposed upon man, end quote. Freud also later adds that, quote, the two main points in the modern educational program are the retardation of sexual development and the early application of religious influence, end quote. Throughout the Stain, Ducornet shows the Catholic Church is failing Charlotte in all of these areas, save the last one. While the God of the physical and natural world actually fulfills these purposes. It's the God of nature who supports Charlotte and teaches her practical lessons that allow her to survive and even thrive, while the Church leaves her feeling frightened and alone. As mentioned previously, both Edna and the Mother Superior repressed the needs of the physical body as a means of becoming closer to God, since, quote, the price of redemption was disgrace, end quote, and the world, the flesh, and the devil are the ultimate enemies of mankind. Flesh and the natural desires of flesh hold a special terror for them, as shown by Edna's fury with her neighbor's animals and her praise of Charlotte's rejection of food. However, rather than using religious teachings to exorcise the terrors of nature, as Freud suggested, Edna in fact uses them to inspire fear within the child. She basically turns Charlotte into an emotional wreck